Well, good morning. Hello and welcome. I am Stephanie with Scientist in Every Florida School. And today we're stepping into the garden. This is a virtual field trip series presented by Mounts Botanical Garden and Scientist in Every Florida School. Into the Garden has a spectacular spring lineup, and we will be kicking things off today with Who Needs Flowers Anyway? My colleague Brian and I are super excited to jump into things, but first we want to share a few details with you and introduce our partner. Scientists in Every Florida School is a free program housed within the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The CEFS program has a mission to engage Florida's K-12 students and teachers in cutting-edge research by providing science role models like today, and hopefully make future stewards for our planet. Again, we are super excited to have you here with us today. And we know that students and teachers have come to depend on CEFS programming. And so we are asking for your support with current House and Senate bills to continue to sustain the programming that we offer. And we would love it if you can help us by contacting your legislators and your district officials and leaders to let them know about your experiences with CEFS. You can also do so through social media by tagging your legislators. So again, thank you. Our partner, Mounts Botanical Garden, is a nationally acclaimed attraction in Florida for residents and visitors alike, and they have a mission to inspire and educate through nature. I'm going to pass things along now to April, our colleague at Mounts, so that she can tell us a little bit about their space and also introduce today's scientist expert. April?
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, welcome everyone. My name is April, and I get to work here at Mounts Botanical Garden. If you don't know what a botanical garden is, think of it kind of like a zoo, but instead of animals, we are filled with plants. We have 16 acres, and we have 25 different gardens. The slide you're looking at now is a garden called Windows on the Floating World, and that's a wetland garden. You can walk around, you can explore. Many of our gardens are filled with flowers of all kinds. And today, here to tell you more about fascinating, cool flowers is Dr. Serena Acha. Dr. Acha?
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Let's start sharing my screen. And can you guys see this, or are you? Let's see. And let's switch displays. Okay, can you see this now?
Looks good.
Okay, excellent. Hey, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to be talking to you. I'm a botanist, biologist, and now I'm currently a data analyst. Let's start with this picture of our planet. It's quite unique if you think about it. Like if you think about other planets, we have a lot of water, we have all these different formation of lands. And if we look closer, every green part of our land is formed or occupied by plants. This is a picture from Florida, and we are super lucky to live in a place like this because we have a lot of water, we have a lot of trees and nature in general. And this is such an important factor for life and animals and overall well-being. But of course, we live in cities or in places where we have built structures to live and do our activities, but hopefully we also share this with nature and plants to have a balance in the environment. And if we look closer, we will see in meadows, like for example, these are the bathhouse at the university here in Gainesville, we'll see flowers and different type of flowers all across. We see, for example, this is a relative to the sunflower, and it has yellow and red flowers, and it's probably pollinated by bees. So wherever you go, you will see some type of plants and flowers that have very unique characteristics. So I'm from La Paz, Bolivia. That's my city. And this is my country. This is where we are. And I always like nature. And that's what I decided to study plants. And that's some pictures when I was a kid. What I do as a scientist, I study plants, of course, and I study mainly their relationships and history. What I mean is, like, I want to know the history of plants, how they evolve, how they move from one place to another, how are the relationships between different plants, if they are like cousins, relatives in the same group, etc. I focus mostly on passion flowers. Some of you might have tried passion fruit juices or candies. That flavor comes from this group of plants. This is a picture of a flower dissected, but I also focus on cacti. For example, this saguaro is a famous cactus that occurs in the desert here in the United States and Mexico. So those are two very cool and interesting groups, but I study other plants as well. And that brings us to our topic of today. Who needs flowers anyway? Let's review some concepts. Probably you have seen some of these things based on the material we share with you. For example, parts of the plant. This is a diagram of the rose plant where the main parts are marked like petals from the flower, the sepals, the stem, the leaves. But as you can see, there are several parts that you can find in a plant. But when you compare it to the real thing in nature or like in the garden, you'll see that it's more complex to distinguish these parts compared to a diagram. That's why there are people that study this for a living. It requires a lot of experience and eye trained for this. And the same happens when we go to look at the flower and its parts. For example, here in the middle is the female part that we call the pistil. It's usually one, but it can be a couple more. And surrounded by it, it is the stamen, the male part. And this is a diagram, but in real life, it would look like this. Excuse me. And here you'll see that it's harder to find. For example, the pistil is over here, I can tell you. And how many stamens are there? There are plenty. So we'll have to look for them and count them. How many type of flowers are in nature? Well, more than we can include in a picture. This is an example of just some types that I like. As you can see, there are different types in like colors, shapes, sizes, and they can all vary depending on where they grow, what they need, or what pollinators they need to attract. So it's quite diverse. But another type of flowers they exist in nature are the conifers, like the Christmas trees, the pines, the cypress. All these have what we call the cones, that they are like naked flowers. Basically, they don't have those showy petals of the rose, but they are all together in these structures that they will form in the future the cone, like the pine cone. So it's quite cool, but they are not as showy and they are pollinated by wind. In a similar style, the grasses, not only your yard grasses, but other grasses that can get quite big, they are also have small flowers that they'll similar to the wheat spikes. So inside each of these small parts, there is one flower. And as you can see, here are some stamens hanging, and inside it would be the pistil, and this fluffy thing that looks like feather would be the stigma. So these guys are also lacking the showy petals or flowers, and they are pollinated by wind. So we already know some of the characteristics of the flowers, but how do most of plants reproduce? We know that pollination is very important for plants, and you have seen in some of the material that is a process that requires a pollinator like a bumblebee, or can be the wind. This will form a fruit. The fruit will contain a seed or several seeds, and this will germinate to produce another individual, and that way the cycle will start again. So it's an essential cycle of reproduction that we need for living. Most individuals depend on this. And this would be impossible to happen if we didn't have the pollinators. As I mentioned, some of the plants focus on wind pollination, right? They only need the wind to pollinate it. Like here, a pine, releasing the pollen to the wind But other plants, or most of them, I could say, depend of very specific pollinators. Most of us know bumblebees, bees, and butterflies, but there are also hummingbirds and other birds. There are even mice or mammals that help pollinate some plants, and bats that are so important, but sometimes not well understood because they pollinate plants that flower at night, but they also pollinate. And finally, some cool example of a lizard visiting a flower. So there are a lot of different pollinators in nature. So why are flowers so important? Why are we talking about those today? Well, some of you might have played this game. So in this game, imagine all the green was gone. You wouldn't have a lot of resources and a lot of things wouldn't be possible without it. That's the importance of plants and flowers. And to put it in perspective of the food chain, this is a diagram where, for example, the green plants or the flowery plants are here, like they would be the producers, and everything depends on them. Like the grasshopper will eat the plants and the different predators will consume the other, but everything goes back to the plants. It's a cycle of the nutrients and resources. But in nature, it's a little bit more complicated. This is a real example from a study here in the United States. And in this case, it's not a circle, it's not a cycle, it's a network. Everything is connected. There's more than one plant. There are flowers, fruits, nectar that they produce, and different animals would consume those resources. And these animals at the same time would be the prey of other animals until reaching like what we call the apex predators like mountain lion, coyote, wolves. So if plants disappear, everything is interrupted. If the flowers do not exist, they don't produce the nutrients for several animals. And then this cycle is interrupted, and eventually everyone will suffer, including the apex predators and the humans. How about Florida? Do we find examples like that? Yes, we do. We have the Everglades, we have the mangroves. It's quite interesting habitat that we find in Florida. And this is a diagram very similar of how important are the mangroves. The mangroves are these plants that they grow in certain parts where they grow in salty water, and they are like trees, but they are so important. Even if they are like just trees, they will produce the environment for fishes to live, and this will include also the influence of dolphins, humans, and if you can see here, all these animals are dependent of this environment that the mangrove trees generate. So they are quite important. And let's see some Florida natives now that we're talking about Florida. So here is the Sabal palmetto. Palm is the plant that you have in your flag and in your symbol of the state. Here is the grown-up palm, and here is the juvenile here. It's everywhere, and it's a beautiful plant, and I'm so happy that we have it in our flag. And this is the distribution of that plant. So it grows mostly in Florida, but it can reach some other places. Another cool example would be the Spanish moss. So something to mention is not a moss. It's a flowering plant called Tillandsia usnioides. Here is what we are used to see in our yards, in the city, everywhere. These are the flowers. Is related to pineapples. Even if you cannot see the resemblance, they are in the same group. What will we do with our flowers? Now we kind of know the importance of flowers, but something to remember is that we are dependent of plants and flowers on food, water, because a lot of water comes from the forest that help the rain condense, shelter with the materials, clothing from the materials as well. And of course, we sometimes forget that the air and our overall health also depends on nature and mostly from plants. And if we see our food, we wouldn't have much to choose without flowers and plants. It would be very difficult to have all our delicious meals without flowers and a diverse group of flowers and plants. And now I want to mention some cool information that you'll have to discuss with your family. For example, the oldest living thing on Earth is one of the oldest plants in the world is a 5,000-year-old Great Basin bristlecone pine. Picture over here, it's in the United States. The important thing to remember is that this plant germinated from a seed and is still alive. So that's a quite cool tree. It's a conifer. Another cool thing that I want to mention is the smallest flowering plant. Those would be in a group that we call Wolffia and Lemna, that are the duckweeds. See, so if you ever go to a pond or a lake and you see these green surface plants there, they could be these guys. This is Lemna, this is Wolffia, and they are very small. And not only small, they have flowers. And this is from Le Wolffia. This is a needle tip, so they are super small, but they have the anther, they have the stamen, they have the stigma in the pistil. So those are the flowers. And even if you don't believe it, they are related to these house plants that we see everywhere, the same group. And almost ending, the largest flower on Earth is a picture here. To the right, it is native from Asia and is Rafflesia arnoldii, or we call it corpse flower. Why this name? Because it has a very bad smell as rotten meat, because it needs to attract fly to be pollinated. And finally, a nice data, is this an animal or a plant? This can be found around Florida in the waters, in the oceans. And this is Elysia chlorotica and is a slug, a sea slug that consumes algae, but it storage its chloroplast. So that's why it's green. That's why it looks like a plant, because it keeps the chloroplast here and it has photosynthesis happening inside its body. So it's both things at the same time, kind of crazy. And with that, I want to thank you, and we'll have some question times, I think. Yes, and yes, and that video game that maybe some of you have played, but it was quite cool, where the plants are the heroes in the story. And thank you, that will be all.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed hearing your presentation and learning about all those examples. As someone that's new to Florida, I'm always looking to learn more about the state that I live in. Any of our attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat and I'll ask them on your behalf. While we're waiting for our participants' questions, I'm curious, how did you get into botany? What made you passionate about this, and how did you find out about this as a career option?
It's very cool, because I was mentioning, we used to go to the countryside with my dad and my sister a lot, like to the river, and like we'll set fires and like eat there. And then that contact with nature made me appreciate more like animals and plants. And when I was older, I realized that plants were super cool, and I could study them in the microscope, and like they were so easy to access. Even in the garden, I could find different groups, and I will dry leaves and check on the flowers. And I think that's what it drove me more to botany. I could have been also a zoologist, but plants were there all the time, like in the backyard and everywhere. And yeah, I think that's why I focus on botany, but I also like plants, animals like birds. I like reptiles as well, but we had to focus on something studying.
And our next question is, what pollinates the corpse flower?
Flies pollinate the corpse flowers. So they attract, because they smell so bad, you know, the flies like the very bad smells. So they will come there, and that's what it pollinates them.
Next, we have our question is there a certain color of flower that attracts more pollinators in Florida?
It depends because depending of the shape and the color, they will attract more. Like, let's see, for example, a cool example, like if it's tubular, if it's red or orange or pink, it might be attracting birds. But if it's yellow, sometimes like very bright yellow, it could be attracting more insects. And the most abundant pollinator are insects. So they could be like that, the yellowish flower that I showed you at the beginning. Those are very common and they will attract a lot of insects.
Great, thank you. Next, we're curious, how often does the corpus flower bloom?
Oh, that's a good question. You saw the size of the flower, right? So it takes long time to flower. So I'm not sure, but it doesn't flower every year because it's so big. It needs to storage resources to bloom every couple of years, but I think it's more. I'm not totally sure, but it takes some time.
Thank you so much. Next up, we're curious, are there any plants that have only one specific pollinator responsible for helping the plant spread?
Of course, there are several examples of plants that they attract only one or maybe two. Let's see. Oops. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. For example, some plants have these long tubes, very long tubes, and only some birds can reach that flower nectar and the pollen. So in those cases, when they are very weird shapes, they might be very specialized. For example, in passion flowers, I don't have a picture of that, but we have different flowers where they are very long and only a hummingbird can pollinate it. So that's the trick. Some plants will prefer only one or two pollinators, and other plants, they don't care. They just want their pollen dispersed.
If you could recommend a few flowers to have in your garden to attract pollinators, what would they be?
Oh, that's a good question. So we recommend wildflowers. There are wildflowers mixes. The ideal thing for your yard would be that there's not only one flower. There are many types. And that depends of the area where you live. I know for sure that Florida has different plants that, for example, where I study, St. Louis, Missouri. So you will have to Google it, and there are zones where the plants can grow. So look and ask for people that are more, like in botanical gardens, they might know also, or horticulture places, and choose something that is native, that is not from somewhere else, because you want to feed the bees or the pollinators from your place that they live there. And if you plant plants from somewhere else, they won't know exactly how to eat them, or maybe they have different flowers that they cannot reach the pollen or the nectar. So ask carefully and choose wisely what to plant.
We have a participant who said they absolutely love this poster, this picture, and are wondering if it's possible to get a copy of it.
This poster, most of the pictures I found, they are from internet. So maybe we can share the presentation in a PDF, and that's how you can find it. I think, yes.
Sure, absolutely. Our next question is, how do people make new plants?
Good question. Let's see. So that's more like there are a group of people that they focus on growing plants. That's a whole discipline, there are professionals that grow plants for a living. For example, with roses, like the simple example, they will find a rose that they like the flower, the color, or maybe it's more big or small. They will select it. They will grow only that. and they will cut, for example, in roses, I think you can cut a piece and like basically make it root, and that's how you reproduce it. And in other cases, you can even combine two types of roses, like cutting a piece and there's like a term in English that I forgot, like drafting, like basically putting it together and putting some wax on top, and they will like combine the two plants and they will grow new forms of roses. It's a whole discipline. It's quite cool what they do. I don't have experience on growing that like plants like that, but there are people that do many interesting things.
Sure. We have time for just a few more questions. Our next one that comes in is, how do flowers smell so nice?
Excellent. That's great. I love that question. So where are the pollinators? Here. So flowers, most of the things that they do, the color, the shape, when they bloom, depends on what they need to attract, what pollinators they need. For example, the plants that attract the bats, usually they open at night and they smell very different, very particular, musky. In other hand, the flowers that attract insects, or I think it's insects, yeah, insects, they tend to have a more fragrant smell, and sometimes the ones that attract birds, but especially insects are the ones that are more smelly. But it depends on what they want to attract, because remember, each animal has different type of senses, right? Like I think bats, for example, they don't see, right? They go out at night. So they rely a lot of the echolocation, but also in the smell. So no, they don't use that much their eyes. But for example, insects, they use a lot of their eyes and other senses, and yeah, I think that's the answer.
Our next question is going to be, how come some plants have seeds and others do not?
Let's see. So plants, the main objective of plants is, of course, reproduce, right? And sometimes the reproduction doesn't need to include seeds. Most of the time it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Where is it here? In some cases, the best strategy to keep on living is just to produce new roots and new stems, like from the ground. There are some plants that you will never see them flowering, and they keep growing, right, and producing new stems and new leaves. So that's one type of strategy, but not all plants follow them. I think some of them prefer that, but overall, most of them will prefer, they rely on seeds to reproduce. Because remember, when they reproduce, there is like pollination between different plants. That's very advantageous for them. There's like diversity in reproducing with a different plant that basically duplicating yourself. That's what they would do if they don't produce seeds. So depends on the strategy of the plant, but both ways can produce new individuals. But you would want eventually to have seeds and reproduce and go all the way.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us, answering all of our questions. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Stephanie to wrap up today's presentation.
Thank you. Let's see.
Thank you, Brian, so much. Thank you, Dr. Acha. What a fascinating bit of information you shared with us today. I saw some comments in the chat box saying the same, so we appreciate that. Be sure to check out our events calendar for some of the exciting lineup for spring, including our next event scheduled for February 15th, entitled Plant Evolution and Climate Change. So with that, we would love for you to take a moment to fill out the survey. It is linked in the chat box for you. It tells us a little bit more about what types of things we're doing right and what types of things you're interested in learning more about. And finally, you can learn more about all of our programs at Mounts and the Scientist in Every Florida School by visiting the websites you see here on your screen, following us on social media, again, sharing information with your district leaders and legislators, and our YouTube channels, where you'll find a recording of today's video, along with the extension resources that we've curated on your behalf. With that, we say thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Bye-bye, everyone.